So, you see things that are normal.
Welcome to Strange Familiars. If you've seen something strange, a cryptid like Bigfoot or a ghost, a UFO, anything paranormal, and you want to tell us your story, you can email us, strangefamiliarspodcast@gmail.com. If you have a shorter story, a great way to get us your story is to leave us a voicemail at 717-347-8554. You can call and leave your message. If you get cut off, you can call back and finish. Right now we're backed up on interviews, so that is the quickest way to get us your story. Again, that's 717-347-8554. Tonight we're going to be talking with Tobias Wayland about his book, The Lake Michigan Mothman, High Strangeness in the Midwest. And this is about a series of sightings of winged humanoids that have been seen around the Chicago and Lake Michigan area. Before we talk to Tobias, I wanted to mention a few things. If you have been watching Hellier, Season 2, the final episode has my music all throughout the episode. It comes from my Wildernessgeist album. I was super happy to see it featured in Hellier, super happy to be a part of it, and it was a really special thing for me, really exciting to watch the episode and hear my music. I mentioned last episode that I did a special edition of the Wildernessgeist CD with a bonus CD, a gifting coin to trade with the other, and a little hex booklet, a collection of charms and spells, including things to protect yourself from goblins, so Hellier related. I made 100 of these, and I kept a few back to make sure I'd be able to fill all the orders, because the orders came in very quickly. We sold about 100 in maybe 3 days. But I do have a few left, and I've put them up at our Etsy shop, which you can find the link in the show notes, and at the Stone Breath Bandcamp. That's stonebreath.bandcamp.com. If you look under merch, you will see the Wildernessgeist hex bag. I think at this time there's about 8 left. If you wanted to get one and you didn't get one before, I held back some extra copies so you can pick them up now at either place. If you order from Bandcamp, you do get a digital download of the original Wildernessgeist album. Again, that's stonebreath.bandcamp.com, and that link is in the show notes as well of every episode. Before we talk with Tobias Wayland, I want to thank our patrons. Without our patrons, Strange Familiars would not be possible. Thank you, patrons. Thanks for all you do. If you'd like to help us continue to make Strange Familiars and get bonus content as well, you could become a patron at Patreon. That's patreon.com/strangefamiliars. There are many different levels of support there, where you can get copies of my books and Strange Familiars t-shirts, buttons, patches, and more. You can check it out at patreon.com/strangefamiliars. But for just $3 a month, you can support the show and get extra content besides. We do one full extra episode of Strange Familiars every month. Often we do more than that. You can check it all out again at Patreon, patreon.com/strangefamiliars. If you don't like the idea of a recurring subscription like Patreon, you can help with a one-time PayPal donation. If you go to the show notes at strangefamiliars.com, under every episode, there's a paypal.me link, and you can use that to make a one-time donation. Everyone can help by sharing the show on social media, by liking and subscribing wherever you're listening to Strange Familiars, and by leaving us those nice 5-star reviews, which helps get the show in front of new potential listeners. So now let's go to my talk with Tobias Wayland about the Lake Michigan Mothman. Tonight we're talking with Tobias Wayland, who has written a book called The Lake Michigan Mothman. We'll be talking to him about Mothman and some other strangeness. How you doing tonight, Tobias?
Great, Timothy. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Now, of course, we know each other because we're both a part of the Phantoms and Monsters 14 investigation team. which has had some insight to these sightings before. So I have some background information, but you were really sort of the point man for most of these investigations.
Well, yeah, actually, I was pretty privileged, I think, to be in a position to investigate these, fairly intimately. Emily and I just live up in Madison, Wisconsin, so we're maybe 2.5 hours north of Chicago. And so especially for those sightings that were in the more liminal spaces, on the edge of the city, and then even further north in Wisconsin and the southeastern part of this state, we were really in a position to be able to go and meet people and investigate those personally. Actually go to the location, which there's just no substitute for. So it was really great. Obviously Lon was, and I'm talking about Lon Strickler here for anybody who doesn't know, the author and investigator behind Phantoms and Monsters. And so Lon was really collecting most of these reports, especially at first. I would say it was split pretty evenly between Lon and Manuel Navarrete over at UFO Clearinghouse. And so often they would collect reports, and Lon especially, living in Pennsylvania, really wasn't in any position to go investigate these sightings firsthand. But what he did do was a really excellent job of collecting them all. Lon has a well-oiled machine set up to collect these reports, and he does a really good job of interviewing people. He's very personable. He knows how to approach witnesses, and so he would often collect these sighting reports, and then he would put me in touch with witnesses, and and I would be able to go and speak with them, or if nothing else, talk to them over the phone and sort of confirm the details of their sightings, and head down to the actual sighting location. Because I think what a lot of people don't understand is so much of paranormal investigation it's not particularly sexy. It's it really is. It's a lot of driving really long distances to spend 30 minutes taking photographs of a place that you could drive by and you wouldn't look at twice because it's literally just like a field or something. And so that was a lot of the kind of stuff that Emily and I would do. For Manuel's part, now he actually does live in Chicago, and so when the reports started to come in quite heavily in 2017, he was able to do a good amount of hands-on investigation in the metropolitan area there, and that was very, very useful. It was nice having somebody there at that time, because I started out in this investigation approaching it journalistically. Sort of the beginning, like the very advent of the modern sighting flat in spring of 2017, I wasn't as active in the investigation as I would come to be, because I didn't even know any of these guys, actually. So I guess just to back up, to give people some context, in the spring of 2017, I was writing for the Singular Fortean Society, which is the organization that my wife Emily and I set up, and I had seen these 3 sighting reports come through the MUFON CMS database, and so they were interesting. They all described either a giant bat-like creature or a owl-like, humanoid creature or something that people were seeing in Chicago, like in the middle of the damn city, like in Chicago. And obviously that's fascinating to any Fortean-minded individual. And so, I wrote an article about it, and MUFON didn't really have a lot of details. They were never really able to follow up on these sightings particularly well. I spoke to the Illinois state director of MUFON, and I mean, they really didn't have much luck, in investigating them in any real meaningful way. And so if that had been it, I probably would have written the one article. It would have been a fun afternoon, and that just would have been the end of it. I would have put it in the shrug file and forgot about it. But, it wasn't too long after that these reports just started flooding in. Lon covered it for Phantoms and Monsters, and Manuel, covered it for UFO Clearinghouse. And the next next thing that these guys knew, like, they were getting tons of these flying humanoid sightings. And so, I noticed them coming through, their websites, and this was a story I had decided to follow. And so I ended up contacting them both individually to interview them about, sort of their experience collecting these reports and just sort of seeing what was behind it and sort of what they had been doing to investigate and that manner of inquiry. And so I was pretty immediately impressed by them both, actually, because, again, at this time, in spring of 2017, like, these guys were basically total strangers. I didn't know anything about them. And we've worked together fairly closely since then, and I would count us all as friends at this point. But
Sure.
But back then, yeah, I mean, I didn't know these guys from Adam, and so I was pretty, like I said, immediately impressed by the level and depth of investigation that had occurred, already, and we're talking. I had interviewed them over the summer of 2017. So at this time, we were maybe, a dozen reports in or so. This was several months of fairly steady reports coming into them.
Yeah,
and it wasn't,
before we move on, I think let's just take a step back 8 minutes into the interview already and sort of lay it out for people, because a lot of people might not be super familiar with this. We are, because we're kind of in the middle of it. So what happened is these winged humanoid sightings started popping up around Chicago starting in 2017, and let's see, MUFON collected some reports, Lon collected some reports. Again, this is all stuff you're going over, but I just want to lay it out for people.
Oh, of course.
And we started getting a lot of reports, mostly through Lon, and like you said, through what's Manuel's
UFO Clearinghouse.
Yes, and through UFO Clearinghouse, and you started going around and meeting and investigating where you could, as well as Manuel was as well, and the rest of the team is we're kind of sitting back here. We're being kept apprised of what's going on, but obviously I'm in Pennsylvania as well. I can't easily run out there. Butch and I had talked about going up there for a weekend to poke around, but it just, we just couldn't make it work with our schedules and so forth. So we're talking about a flap of sightings here that is, as far as my experience goes, and I asked Lon if this was his experience too, and he said he believes it was so. The most concentrated flap of sightings as far as number and geographical area that we've ever experienced. So we don't know, there was no internet during the Point Pleasant Mothman flap in the 60s. So maybe if they had an internet, more people would have reported, and it would have been just as concentrated, and there would have been just as many sightings back then. We don't know. We don't know. We can only guess. But as far as what we know, what we've experienced, and Lon is certainly, he's done this for, I don't know however many decades. I've done this for a while, and it was very interesting to me because I said, Lon, at some point I just said, is this the most concentrated group of sightings that you've ever experienced? And I think he thought for a minute, and he said, yeah, I think it is. I think this is a really, really concentrated group of sightings. So it becomes really, really interesting in the number of sightings, the number of witnesses, and the geographic area. It's fairly concentrated.
I would say that the current distribution of sightings on the surface level definitely reflects that. But my personal opinion is, as this investigation continues, there's mounting evidence to show, I think, that these flying humanoid reports, like these Mothman sightings, as it were, now they are heavily localized around the Chicago area, but as it continues, the longer this goes on, the more historical sighting reports we've received, and the more sighting reports we've received from everywhere around Lake Michigan. So, at this point, we've got sighting reports from Illinois, obviously, but also, a significant number in Wisconsin, Indiana, and even a handful from Michigan, although that has been the state that has reported the least right now. But I guess my point is, when it comes to these sightings, certainly we're getting the most reports from Chicago. In my opinion, we're also getting the majority of the least credible reports also come from Chicago. And the further you get away from that metropolitan area, the better the reports are, at least in my estimation. As an example, like I think that there's a pretty good chance a sizable percentage of the sightings in the Chicago, downtown area, like the real urban metropolitan area, could likely be misidentified birds. And there's a specific profile of sighting that I think matches that. So without having to go through and explain 50 separate, like literally 50 separate sightings, there is a certain profile of these sightings wherein the witness will describe seeing something big flying at some distance away during normal daylight hours, and they don't really get a good look at it. They only see its silhouette. And certainly it's something that they don't recognize, but it's generally lacking in any of the more unusual elements that we would normally see in what I would consider the more paranormal sightings. So by that I mean, it's really lacking any elements of high strangeness. So in these likely large bird scenario sightings, people don't feel the overwhelming sense of fear that is often associated with these sightings. There's no associated UFO activity or later psychic phenomena or just anything paranormal to go along with this sighting. And I have collected a pretty good amount of circumstantial evidence to point towards that being a real possibility for a lot of the actual Chicago sightings. And I would put it at about probably, in my estimation, roughly 50% of what came out of Chicago directly, I think, has a pretty good chance of being a misidentified large bird. And there's one case in particular that will always stick out to me because it was the one case where we had hard evidence that a perfectly honest guy had come forward with a sighting of something he couldn't explain that absolutely 100% was a misidentified large bird, probably a great blue heron, I would guess, just from the evidence we have. This was from the Pilsen neighborhood in Chicago. And so this guy was bicycling to work, and he noticed this couple on the street corner, and it was a man and a woman, and the man was pointing up in the sky. And so naturally, he wanted to see what they were looking at. He looks up and he sees what he described to me, first to Lon and then to me. We both spoke to him as either a person in a wingsuit or a giant bat or something similar to that. And he was authentic to his experience. I believe that because I spoke to him personally. And so I really think that in that moment, that's what he thought he saw. And luckily for all of us, since he was bicycling, he had a GoPro camera attached to his bicycle helmet. And he, God's bless him, decided that he was going to follow this thing around and try to get as much footage of it as he could so he could take it, to somebody.
Right.
So we could try to figure out what the heck it was. And so he ends up sending us this video, and we were able to get some good stills out of it. And we were able to blow him up, got him cleaned up, looked at him, and it was a bird. It was clearly some kind of large bird, and it just is what it is. And again, by its silhouette, I would guess great blue heron.
Right.
And I don't want to bore people with a lot of talk about birds and stuff, but the fact is there's a lot of reasons, just normal scientific reasons, why people are seeing more herons in Chicago than they would have been even 5 years ago, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is, that only accounts for like 50% or so of these sightings.
Right. And this becomes a problem with the sort of debunking, capital S skeptic, because they can say one report or two reports or even 50% of the reports were birds. Well, then they'll just write them all off as birds. Of course. They're just birds. Yeah.
Which is very frustrating. But,
yes.
Of course, we have to be honest. And at the end of the day, I'll never insult, my readers, like, especially with the trying to cover things as openly as honestly as possible. I decided very early on I was never going to insult the intelligence of our readers by having to spoon feed them stuff. And so I am trusting in the fact, and I haven't been disappointed. So I think this was the right way to go. But I'm trusting in the fact that the discerning reader, anybody of any sort of intellectual capacity is going to be able to see that just because some of these were likely misidentified large birds, doesn't mean that they all necessarily were. And actually, on top of that, if we want to get weird with it again, there is a weird aspect to the misidentified large bird sightings. I mean, it never made a lot of sense to me to have these people come forward with these authentic experiences, because again, I think these people weren't trying to pass off large birds as something weird. I think that they had seen something that they couldn't explain.
Right.
And for whatever reason, they had interpreted it a particular way. And again, for whatever reason, that particular way happened to be more often than not as a giant bat or as a humanoid figure with bat-like wings. And that's really weird, because I get people misidentifying these large bird species when they're suddenly in urban areas and people aren't necessarily used to seeing them in these kinds of numbers. But what I don't get is people consistently misidentifying them in the same way that just happens to fit with this investigation that we're already conducting. Mm-hmm. And people weren't misidentifying them as this before, and they really haven't been in the same kind of numbers since. And they also really haven't been in many other places where you might expect them to. And so in my speculative mind at this point, I have to wonder why. What is it possible that there's some other mechanism at work here, something manipulating people into misidentifying something a particular way, frankly.
This is an idea that I have played with myself, and it drives some other researchers crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Because this gets into the whole sort of trickster element of the paranormal,
mm-hmm.
and the why. But I was on, I think it was on Where Did the Road Go one time, and we were talking about someone who misidentified a bear as a Bigfoot. And, we went through the whole thing, it was all misidentified, blah, blah, it was just a bear, blah, blah, blah. And I posited the idea. I said, well, maybe for this person, I believe it was a woman, I said, maybe for this woman, at the time she saw it, maybe it wasn't a bear. Maybe she, for whatever reason, she genuinely saw something else. And, of course, it drives everyone crazy, because at that point, we've opened up so many weird possibilities. But it is an idea that's very interesting to me. And when I read it, I believe you kind of go over that in the epilogue to your book a little bit. And when I read your thought on that, I'm like, it kind of struck a bell with me. I'm like, yeah, sometimes I wonder with this stuff. Sometimes I really wonder, because the truth is, most people can tell the difference between a bear and something that walks upright like a man. I mean, it's really true. And a lot of people say, well, people can't tell a bear from this and that. Well, yeah, most people can, and most people can tell something with broad shoulders that has arms versus a bear that that does not have broad shoulders, and they walk differently and so forth. And most people can tell the difference between, if they saw a big bird, they would tell you, I saw a big unusual bird, right? They wouldn't say, I saw a big bat or a big Batman or a big, however they're describing it. So it's just a very, very odd thing. It's a very odd detail, and it's very, very interesting.
It really is. And, sort of similarly, I've been really struggling with it because, again, it was this just strange aspect of the investigation that is really sort of localized in this one specific area and also in this one specific time, in the sort of summer or spring of 2017 through maybe the summer of 2018. So I mean, I guess maybe somebody could argue that people got used to seeing them. I guess I don't really know, but it always seemed to me like it was just too much of a coincidence for that number of people to be misidentifying something in exactly the same weird way.
Right.
And so, I started thinking, well, I mean, why? Like, why would this happen, right? Like, why would anything want to make them see things this particular way? And I thought, honestly, at first that, maybe it was some kind of camouflage, maybe it was, well, like you said, something put in place to give skeptics something to point at to just debunk the whole thing. And so it sort of creates this plausible deniability of the entire phenomenon. Mm-hmm. But I thought about it a little bit more, and I'm like, well, okay, maybe, but at the same time, we're like 100 reports in, and every single time we get a misidentification, that just increases the chances of other people seeing that and then reporting their sightings. Because that was a whole big thing, since we have the internet now, which, of course, you mentioned earlier, people's ability not only to share their own sightings, but even to become aware that other people are having them. And so to be motivated to share them themselves has increased exponentially.
Oh, yeah. And that's why I love having witnesses on the show, because inevitably someone else will hear it and they'll say, well, they told their story. I guess I can tell my story. And,
right.
And they'll come on and tell it. It's a wonderful thing. But yeah, it's really happening. Again, I'm able to see when the reports come in, at being part of the group, and they're still going. We're still getting reports. Right.
And so it never made sense to me why, like, assuming, there's some sort of like forced cosmic trickster or something at work here, it's got to be smart enough, right, to have the desired outcome. Whatever that is, like whatever's happening must be what it wanted to have happen. And so the result of these misidentifications wasn't really ever to cast a lot of doubt on it. What it did was shine a huge light on all of the actually weird sightings, because that's what we end up getting. And the more popular the investigation became, the more really credible, weird sightings we ended up getting, stretching all the way back into the late 60s, through November of this year, actually.
Yeah. Like I said, they're still coming in. I mean, just because you've written the book doesn't mean the sightings have stopped.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. But, so, the only thing that ever actually ended up making sense to me then was that for whatever reason, if we're willing to assume that somehow people were being manipulated into misidentifying these birds as, this Lake Michigan Mothman, then because the end result was that we ended up getting a lot more actually really weird, credible sightings out of this, then that must have been the whole point. For whatever reason, if, again, Fort's cosmic trickster is out there playing head games with us, it must have wanted that to be the end result, which is interesting.
I think you have a generally more positive way of looking at it than I do. I just see it as just muddying the waters. Like, whatever it wants to do, just let's just muddy the waters with everything. Let's just throw it all in chaos. Have misidentified sightings, have, enough weirdness that goes on with other sightings where, witnesses will be questioned and so forth, and just muddy the waters as much as possible, making it just a completely chaotic mess as far as being able to unravel all the threads, I guess.
Oh, sure. And,
and that's just my take. Like I said, I kind of like yours. If there's more of a purpose behind it. I mean,
I'm the eternal optimist. Yeah. This isn't a hill that I'm willing to die on.
Sure.
Because,
yeah. I mean, we'll be either. Who knows, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, maybe. And again, I definitely started thinking that the whole point of that was just to confuse the hell out of people and camouflage everything. So who knows? Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, it could be either.
I mean, honestly, I think the important takeaway is if you're willing to at least entertain the idea of something creating these misidentifications, then, what vistas of imagination does that open up? What further inquiries, lines of inquiry can we make based off of that assumption? I mean, I think it speaks, at least to me, to sort of the idea that so much of this seems to happen sort of on the level of human consciousness, where it's sort of this direct interaction, almost of thought. I guess it's difficult to describe in a way because there is an element of physicality, certainly, but also there's a strong immaterial aspect, that I think is very, very plastic and malleable, and I think it's shaped, seemingly, at least from what I've seen in this investigation, by whatever it is we're dealing with, and maybe part of it comes from people's expectations, but I really think the majority of the agency behind what people are seeing is with the phenomenon itself, and it certainly seems to interact with people sort of directly on that level of consciousness, which, again, if you choose to be optimistic, could be really cool, or if you watch I don't know, a lot of Cronenberg or something, could be super terrifying.
Right.
So, I mean, it's sort of a matter of perspective. I think I actually touch on that in the book too, because one of the things that I was reminded of is sort of all of the interconnectedness between paranormal phenomena, where, one man's ghost light is another man's, UFO or will-o'-the-wisp or wild hunt or whatever. And so it really got me thinking, so if this is something that interacts with people sort of on that level of consciousness, I mean, what are all of the possibilities here? What sort of weird transhuman vistas even could be opened? I mean, if you think about, I guess, sort of, okay, let's say ghosts, for instance. Now, if somebody is willing to accept that one of the explanations for some ghosts and hauntings could be that there is a surviving, human consciousness, right? That is around without a physical body, through whatever mechanism. Then, if there are things out there that interact directly with human consciousness, then how would they necessarily interact with, well, let's say a human consciousness post-mortem. I mean, people used to think that, fairies were the spirits of the dead. Mm-hmm. I mean, what if people actually could become could become fairies after they die? What if people could become Mothmen? I don't know, but it's so interesting to me to think about sort of this ecosystem of consciousness, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Where all of these possibilities exist. And I think if we're willing to really explore them, like, no matter how weird it gets, because I mean, I think a lot of people are very sort of disturbed by anything that sort of challenges their traditional, beliefs about, well, in this case, about like what a human even is, that, it can be very, I think, unsettling. Mm-hmm. for people to consider these kinds of possibilities. But again, if you're willing to accept that human beings have consciousness that could potentially survive bodily death, then it must exist. It must exist somewhere. And then furthermore, if we're willing to accept that there are seemingly these beings that are capable of communicating directly through consciousness, then these things must exist within the same ecosystem,
So this sort of dovetails into something else I wanted to cover later, but we might as well jump into it now. So you're looking at this in the sort of holistic manner, and as regards to the paranormal, which I agree with. That's my approach to the paranormal. Let's look at things holistically, because they seem to be somehow connected in ways that we probably don't fully understand, but certainly in ways that we can draw comparisons between UFO sightings and ghost accounts and Bigfoot accounts, et cetera, et cetera. There are plenty of lines to draw between those type of sightings and experiences. There was, during the course of this investigation, it got attacked, and by it I mean the investigation itself, the witnesses, without naming names, from certain aspects of the community. And I think there were several reasons for this. But one of these reasons, I think, is these are people that really, really, really have invested in flesh and blood creatures. And in the idea that, you're going to find somewhere under a bridge or something, a Mothman nest, with eggs in it or something, because these are absolutely real flesh and blood creatures that people are seeing. And some of these same people really, really attacked this investigation and were very vocal about it, and to the point where I have heard from several of my colleagues, several people who I'm great friends with, that, the Chicago Mothman sightings, all that stuff, the Lake Michigan Mothman sightings, they were proved to be fake. And they'll just say that, and that's that, because these people were very vocal about it. Now, some of the reason is, I'll say straight out, that Lon is very, very protective of his witnesses, which I absolutely agree with. It's very, very difficult to get people to come forward to talk about this stuff. And Lon, as long as I've known him, which is a good while now, has been fiercely protective of his witnesses, of their identities, of their locations, et cetera, et cetera. He doesn't share except with the team, with the research team. He will share with us. But in general, he just doesn't do it. He doesn't make that information public. And I think it frustrates other investigators. But, he and we in general have had some bad experiences by sharing that. People will seek people out and harass them or contact people who didn't want to be contacted. It's a good policy, I think, on Lon's part not to do that. So I think some of the frustration came from that. We weren't sharing witnesses. I know there was one instance where a police report was filed, and people tried to get the police report and couldn't. And because they couldn't get the police report, they said, it must have been faked, which I've pointed out again and again. I've tried to get many police reports over the years as regards to paranormal stuff, and very, very few times, if I've ever gotten that police report, the police just, unless we could afford lawyers to make them release them, which we can't. Mm-hmm. And the police don't release them, they don't release them. There's nothing we can do about that. If they don't give us the report, they don't give us the report. It doesn't mean it didn't exist. And right. I've talked to policemen as well who said sometimes they just don't file these weird reports because it doesn't look good for them. This is their career. So they're not going to file a report that says, I saw Bigfoot cross the road. They're just not going to do it. They're going to, that's going to go somewhere else because they don't want to be the guy that filed the report on Bigfoot. They think it doesn't look good on the record for whatever reason, and I could understand that. So in any case, I do think it's interesting that these attacks came from some of these people who are very invested in the idea of flesh and blood creatures when we're talking about something a little bit stranger, I should say. And I don't know if you have any comments on that, but it is a point I wanted to bring up.
Do I? No, I have a lot of very strong feelings. Obviously, I do try very hard to be objective.
Sure. Yeah.
I would say that materialism probably played a part. I think you're being very charitable in assuming that it was a materialist scientific approach that was sort of acting as the impetus for certain naysaying, when my personal belief is that the fact is investigators are people. They're humans like anybody, and not everybody gets into this for the same reason. And I think that what we saw in at least a few cases from my perspective was not so much people upset because they were really counting on finding an undiscovered species of Mothman out there, but because they weren't allowed to make the investigation about themselves. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry that might piss some people off, but it's the truth. Because if you care about people, if you got into this because you care about these phenomena and you care about the people experiencing them, then you have to know, if you've ever spoken to an actual witness before, you have to know that they don't want to talk to an endless stream of strangers just to assuage these people's curiosity. All right?
Absolutely.
They don't want to. And anybody who would put these people through that, I think, are far more interested in finding celebrity than they are in finding cryptids, frankly. And that was a real turnoff for me. Mm-hmm. And yeah, we saw it time and time again. And, the thing about protecting, witness identities and stuff is, I don't think I can overemphasize its importance. And frankly, talking specifically about Lon and everybody else in this investigation, we were very open about sharing this stuff with each other. Because of course we were all working together, and sometimes it's nice to have a second, set of ears listening to somebody's testimony and stuff, especially if it seemed the more credible something seemed, the more you wanted other people in on that, sort of verifying the information and everything else. But, the number one thing that witnesses have told me in general, and also specifically in the course of this investigation, is that generally speaking, this is how their post-sighting experience goes down. They have their sighting, it's paradigm shattering. It's a huge deal to them. They go, and one of the first things they want to do is they want to tell somebody, and so they talk to a loved one or a close friend, and they get laughed at, by somebody that they trust intimately. It could be a spouse, it could be a best friend, whatever, and they get laughed at, and they don't tell anybody ever again until they find somebody like us just stumble across us and say, "Oh, hey, wow, look at all of these other people who have seen something similar to me. Maybe I can tell these guys."
Right. Well, the number one reason I get, so if I'm at a paranormal convention and someone will come up and I can tell they have a story because they'll pause. They'll sit there and they'll kind of shuffle their feet and they'll wait till other people leave. They'll wait till other people leave the table and they'll come up and they'll talk to me, and often I'll say "Hey, do you want to come on the podcast? It's a great story." And the number one reason I'm given as a refusal is I don't want people to think I'm crazy.
Yep.
That's the number one reason.
Absolutely. Well, that honestly brings up another really good point. Sometimes people will ask me, what type of person is reporting, these sightings. And I mean, I don't really know what kind of question that is, frankly. Like there isn't a type. Like sometimes I get a sense where I'm like, I get where you're going with this, and I don't like it.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So, but the fact is, these witnesses, they're from every demographic, frankly, and all the way across the socioeconomic spectrum. And yeah, some of these people, beyond the social stigma and embarrassment or fear of being called crazy or something, there's a decent number of these people who have professional careers, and they're not going to ruin their whole life over a monster sighting.
Exactly.
Frankly.
Exactly.
So, and I don't blame them. But, people ask, why don't these people go to the police? Why isn't this better represented in like the mainstream media? Well, people have seen what happens to people who report UFOs and monster sightings and little green men in the freaking media since the 1940s.
Oh, and since the 1800s, really.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But it ruins the witness's life. Like, do you think, like, the people who originally reported, just as a few examples, like the original Flatwood Monsters witnesses, like, they hate talking about it, ruined their life. That might be a little hyperbolic, but they regret talking about it. It had a huge negative influence in their life, It was the same thing, with like Kelly Hopkinsville. So many of these sightings all the way up through like the 1970s, early 80s. And the last, I think, big name I can think of is probably Whitley Strieber. And I think after that, you see kind of a big drop-off. Like, there are still some people who will come forward, and you certainly get like con artists and stuff that try to become known for certain experiences and stuff. But there's a huge drop-off in people willing to talk about this stuff publicly and certainly be in like a national media spotlight, sometime in the like 1980s. And I think people wised up. I think that they saw that, one, there's nothing the police are going to be able to do for me. They've never helped anybody with any of this stuff, because what are they going to do? Like, no crimes being committed. They're going to show up. There's not a monster there. They move on. And now your name's on a public record that anybody can find, and the media will, and they'll come hound you. And the next thing you know, you're the laughingstock of your town. Your career, if you had one, is done, is dead. You might have to move.
Right.
Like, everybody knows that narrative. Even if you're not involved with the paranormal whatsoever, you're familiar with that specific narrative. And nobody wants to be involved with it. And who could blame them, honestly?
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, witness privacy it's a big deal. And anybody who doesn't understand that, like I said, they are in this for the wrong reasons. I've certainly never had any problem as far as, keeping people anonymous. And I think that what we can do as investigators to combat that, the best thing we can do is be credible ourselves, honestly. We have to lend our witnesses our credibility, which is why it's so important to me to be so, as open and honest and ethical in every aspect of every investigation that I'm a part of as I possibly can be. Because at the end of the day, to protect these people, I'm willing to say, look, like, this person is going to be anonymous because they want to protect themselves. They want to protect their personal life. But you guys know how I do this, like, you're familiar with how I investigate. Like, you can fact check everything that I'm going to put out there, and I'm willing to put my credibility on the line for these people. So, anybody can go through anything I've ever written and point at something, and if they find a lie, well, let's just say good luck finding, anything you could point at and say, that is like, that's simply not true. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think, well, like I said, I think that's the best possible way we can help these people. It's
right.
It's just lending credibility.
Right. To conclude, I just want to, sort of, if you've heard like, it's been debunked or all that, that's one agenda that's out there, and it's put out by people who weren't doing the investigation, quite honestly. That's the end of what I'll say about that. Unless you were on the ground doing the investigation, you really don't know. And Tobias, you were, so there's that.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Now, speaking of, like, we talked a little bit about birds. Did you run into anything else, like mundane explanations for these, like, drones or people in wingsuits, things like that?
No, actually. When we first started out, I actually fully expected to find some evidence of somebody, at least hoaxing something with like a drone, for instance, would have been a perfectly reasonable candidate, I think. But we never found any evidence of it, frankly. I couldn't say with 100% certainty that nobody ever did.
Sure.
But I can say that the reports we received with the maneuvers described in the areas in which they took place, I strongly believe disallow something like, well, a person in a wingsuit, for instance, like they would have been fishing these people out of the Chicago River, like frankly.
Yeah.
And drones also, drones are pretty cool. They can do a lot of neat stuff. But again, like the kinds of maneuvers that people were describing, the swooping low to the ground underneath bridges and things, it really seemed like whatever it was, and, maybe some of it was birds, like I said, but whatever it was capable of doing things that those two particular things wouldn't have been able to do, at least not consistently, and certainly not so consistently that, after dozens and dozens of these sightings, we wouldn't have found more evidence. Somebody would have crashed a drone into the side of a building or something, or at least somebody would have actually spotted it as a drone. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, no, I just never found anything to support either of those. And frankly, I never really found anything to support any explanation other than, misidentified large birds and, then the obvious weird paranormal stuff. You mentioned the Auburn Gresham police report incident, and yeah, I was one of those people. Like I contacted the like that particular police precinct in Chicago trying to get that report, and like they didn't even respond to me. It wasn't even that like they told me that no such report existed. They just ignored me.
Exactly. That's what I found most of the time when I go after Bigfoot reports that people told me the police took down the report. UFO reports, other anomalous reports, time and again, that's most often the case. They just don't respond.
Yeah. Well, there was in this investigation, there was one helpful police agency, which was in Mchenry County. Actually, the McHenry County Sheriff's Department did provide me with an incident detail report showing that a resident there called 911 to report a monster, frankly. And yeah, that was the one piece of verifiable evidence coming from an actual police agency that I was able to ever gather. But back to my other point, I guess, is, look, for somebody to say that, Auburn Gresham has to be a hoax is no better than somebody saying Auburn Gresham has to be paranormal or has to be an alien or has to be an undiscovered animal. The real fact is the evidence that we have doesn't allow us to make any determination.
Right.
It just doesn't. And anybody who is saying otherwise is being dishonest, frankly. And I have found that that kind of dishonesty seems to be so much more palatable for some reason, not to me, but to other people, so much more palatable when it's coming in service of materialism than, when it's for any other cause. And it's really been frustrating throughout this investigation. Like, look, if we could find evidence, not even proof, just evidence that this had actually been hoaxed, like Auburn, Gresham specifically, because that's really the only one that I think even, is in the realm of me considering that. If we found evidence of that, then that would be great. Then, we could look at that evidence and go, oh, okay, wow. So look at this evidence we have that maybe this thing was hoaxed or whatever, but it doesn't exist. And so all of these people, want to come out and say, oh, well, that was obviously hoaxed because, reasons. But it's always struck me as very disingenuous, like the people saying stuff like that, they're not stupid, like they have to know better. It always struck me that they have to be capable of rational thought enough to understand that what they're saying isn't logically consistent,
But it serves their
agenda.
Yeah, it serves their agenda because, which may be as simple as, if you guys won't let me play, then I'm going to ruin your game,
Absolutely.
So, who can say? Who can say?
Yeah, no, I think that you're probably right about that. Unfortunately, it's, I don't cover that a lot in the book. I very pointedly say, that at one point I think I spend maybe 2 or 3 sentences on it, and and that's enough. Honestly, sure. Frankly, like we've probably talked about it more right here, than I mention it in the actual book, because it's just so not helpful. Like it has nothing to do with anything. And if everybody could just ignore, people doing it, then that would be great. It's sort of outside of the purview of this work anyway.
Right.
So
as you're doing this investigation, can you, just sort of whet the appetite of the listeners, and we love all things paranormal here. Can you describe maybe a couple of the most compelling, weirdest, your favorite, whatever it is, whatever the sightings are that stood out the most for you?
Sure. So there are a couple that I have in mind, actually, and they are sort of tangentially related by proximity and sort of general sighting details. So I spoke to this wonderful lady named Paula. This would have been earlier this year, actually. And she told me about how, and she actually, now she agreed to let me use her first name. That was her idea. So, but anyway, yeah, Paula was a perfectly wonderful woman. And she told me about how in 2014, she was living in Wakanda, Illinois. And so, that's several dozen miles west of Lake Michigan. It's sort of the, in the outer suburbs of the Chicago area there. And she was sitting near a window in the bedroom of her ground level apartment. And she looks outside and she sees this bright beam of light come shooting down across the street. This is about at like 11 p.m. And so she sees this light, which she said lasted between 15 and 20 seconds, comes down. It's this orangish gold color. And interestingly, this light, when it comes down, it seems unusually solid. Like it's not illuminating its surroundings like you would expect, say, a spotlight to do, right?
Right.
And it doesn't really move much. It just makes a sort of like slight side to side, back to forth motion. And then it retracts up into the sky. And so when I say retract, I don't mean disappeared. I mean, if you picture like one of those collapsible cups, it like literally just retracted up into the sky. And so she sees it go up, and then it shoots back down. And at that point, the first thing she thinks is, oh my God, like this thing saw me. Like she just described this deep feeling of whatever this thing was being aware of her. And so like she falls back onto her bed in shock, but it just retracts back up into the sky and was gone. And so, I sort of asked her my usual questions for that kind of experience. And, she didn't have any missing time. There's no unusual physical maladies or anything else to indicate that she'd had any more contact than what she had described there until 2 years later. And actually 2 years exactly to the day, she was outside, and this time it was about 6 a.m. And this was in April, so it wasn't completely dark, sort of early morning gloom, really. And she's taking the garbage out, and she sees something across the street. Something just sort of draws her eye, and so she looks up, and she sees this huge winged being, and she described it to me as roughly 7 to 8 feet tall. 7 to 8 feet tall if it was standing completely upright, but it was carrying itself hunched over and sort of limping along. And she said it was completely black, and from what she could see, its upper body and head were covered in hair. And this thing had these long, leathery wings, which it had partially wrapped around its body, and it was moving towards her. But it wasn't moving, walking or flying or anything. She described it as jumping forward, similarly to watching someone move through a strobe light. And as it moved forward, it was making these strange, unnatural groaning noises, and she described feeling this palpable sense of evil coming off of this thing, and literally told me that she remembers still thinking, this is evil. I'm seeing evil as this thing comes towards her, and so she's terrified. And she turns around to flee back into her apartment. And after fumbling with her keys for a moment, like she gets the door open and she turns around and she's sure that this thing is going to be right behind her. It's going to be breathing down her neck. And she turns around and it's gone, just disappeared. And that one stuck with me.
Yeah,
frankly,
that's pretty intense.
Just down the road from there, in Woodstock, Illinois, was probably one of the, if not the most interesting sort of mini flap within like this larger phenomenon. And that started out about a month before Paula got in touch with me. Now, this guy originally went to Lon, like this witness wrote Lon. Actually, the original email came from this guy's wife. And she wrote Lon and described his experience. So unlike Paula's experiences that took place, in 2014 and 2016, respectively, this guy's sighting was actually February of this year. So this would have been February 22nd. And now, one of the hallmarks of these sightings is sort of the mundanity of people's activity, I think, just before experiencing their sighting, right? So like in Paula's, you've got her just, she's just sitting sort of idly in her room and she sees this light outside, or she's taking the garbage out and she sees a monster. Now this guy was just driving home from Walgreens of all things, just a perfectly normal, a perfectly normal evening at 8 p.m. when he sees this thing coming across the road. He's driving in Woodstock, sort of on the way out of town. Woodstock isn't very big. He's driving past the entrance of the Dewfield Pond natural area. And so he sees what he described as an 8 to 9 foot tall, dark, sort of hairy being, again, with these large leathery wings, and he said this thing took up about a third of the road. Now, again, this was 8 p.m., in late February, so it was dark out when this happened. And so he caught this thing in his headlights for a few seconds as it crossed the road. And then, before he knew it, it was across the road and gone. And, so Lon had spoken to him first, and then he got a hold of me and said, well, hey, Tobias, you got to talk to this guy too. And hopefully you can get down there because, this is pretty intense. And this guy's seems like a great witness. And he was. And so I ended up speaking to him over the phone, and Emily and I set up a time where we could go down there and we could speak to him, and we did. And we spoke to him, and we spoke to his wife, and they were nice enough to take us out to the sighting area, and we looked around Dewfield Pond, and it's a sizable natural area. I think it's something like, hold on, I actually can pull this up. Yeah, it's about 78 acres. So it's not a national forest, but right. It's not nothing. Mm-hmm. And so they took us out there, and we sort of got the lay of the land here. And right across the entrance from Dewfield Pond, you've basically got like one house, and then behind that is the McHenry County Fairgrounds. So we got pictures of everything, and we even found a potentially anomalous footprint, and you might actually appreciate this. Let me tell you about this weird footprint. So we're out in the area of the entrance to Dewfield Pond, and there are some tracks out there. So you can see boot prints for one, and dog tracks, and there are even some what I would guess to be like crane, probably like sandhill crane tracks, just kind of out there. And so it's a decently trafficked area. It's not really open right now, and it is late winter, so a ton of people haven't been out there. But it looks like some people probably been walking their dogs out here, Mm-hmm. And so we're walking along, and I see this one weird print. And I noticed it because it's huge, and it was sort of elongated, and so it's in the ice, and so we couldn't really do much with it other than take a photograph, right? Which we did, of course. And in the photograph, you can see its size compared to my boot. I wear a size 12, so. It's easily 3 or 4 times the size of my foot. And what I noticed about it was that it was in the shape of a human footprint, but sort of stretched out, and you could see clearly articulated toes. And there's just one print. It's a single print with no other matching prints anywhere, anywhere near it that we could find. And the only thing approaching a mundane explanation that I could think of was if somebody had one of those, or, maybe not one, they'd probably be wearing both, of a set of those barefoot running shoes, because they have the individual toes and everything. And they just happen to be running through Dewfield Pond on this ice and snow in their barefoot running shoes for some insane reason. And they managed to leave this one print that was then, partially melted and distorted by the sun, which can happen, of course. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Then maybe, but how likely is that scenario? Yeah. In the same area where, this guy reported this huge bipedal creature that, frankly, for lack of any better description sounds a lot like a Bigfoot with huge, bat wings. To find that single track there, it certainly seemed mysterious to me. And like I said, I would have expected, if it was from any other cause, to find, I don't know, more tracks. Like why would there just be this one? But it was interesting. Like it was definitely very strange.
Well, I mean, I can tell you from the book Josh and I are working on now, single tracks are a thing. Just
right.
I don't know what they mean or why, but they are a thing.
Yeah, like, well, I was talking to Jay Bachochin, and he had told me about a set of tracks that he had found, and it was just a handful of them, and like many others that people have described, like they just kind of appeared out of nowhere and then disappeared back into wherever, whatever bizarre dimension from which they had originated, but they just sort of start out of nowhere, go like 12 feet and then disappear back into nowhere.
Yeah.
And it's just bizarre. And so this actually set off sort of a mini flap, which I think I had mentioned earlier. And so this actually led to, most interestingly, that police report that I had mentioned before. So right across the street from the Dewfield Pond entrance, like I said, just past this house, in the path this thing was headed, is the McHenry County Fairgrounds. And so that police report that I received, it's actually an incident detail report. So it only shows that somebody called 911 because there wasn't like a real investigation or anything, because the police didn't find a monster when they showed up. So anyway, right in the path of where this thing would have been going, past this house across the street from Dewfield Pond, is the McHenry County is the McHenry County Fairgrounds, where somebody was standing outside of the Jewel Osco, and this would have been shortly after this sighting, and he sees what he described as basically the exact same thing as this guy, an 8 or 9 foot tall hairy hominid with these huge gargoyle or bat-like wings, these membranous wings. And he said that this thing charged the fence at him before taking off, and so he was scared enough to call 911, and he did. I got a copy of that incident detail report, and it says that things went down exactly as he described. Funny story about that, actually. Like, I didn't expect to get that incident detail report. Like that second report, which is totally unrelated to this first guy. Like, they have nothing to do with each other than that the details
proximity
match.
Yeah,
right. So he had actually, this second witness had actually emailed me. I have never spoken to this second witness in real life. Like, this other guy, I met him, I met his wife, I've seen their house, they're wonderful people. The second guy, he emailed me and told me what happened and said that he had called 911 or whatever, and I was like, wow, man, can I get a copy of that police report? And also, can I interview you? And he's like, yeah, I'll see what I can do. And like so many other witnesses, he just kind of ghosted, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep,
and
that happens too. Yeah.
Oh yeah, like that happens all the time.
Yeah,
and like, so I was like, okay, well, he did mention this police report. And so I guess I'll just file a FOIA request with the McHenry County Sheriff's Department. And I did. And they were super nice and got back to me in like 3 days.
Wow. And
like, yeah, right. And they were like, here you go. We don't have an official police report because, like no real investigation was conducted. Because there really was no crime committed or anything. Mm-hmm. But, here's this incident detail report that shows that this guy did call 911 and a sheriff's deputy did respond to the scene and spoke to the guy who called, and like that was it. He took the guy's testimony, and it matched what he told me. And so like that was very, very interesting. I mean, one of my personal, basically like how I handle reports that I can't verify or investigate up to my standards is I don't publish them usually. Or if I do, I created a specific column just for them. And so we ended up calling it Reports from the Void. And it's literally for those reports that we get that, like I said, maybe it's a one-off email. Maybe we make it as far as setting up like a phone interview or something, and then the person just disappears. But, I can't publish those as credible articles. I can't say, hey, this is super important. You guys really need to pay attention to this when I didn't even get to speak to the witness,
Right.
And so, like we have this specific column for that. And that's where I thought this guy's report was going to go, right up until when I got the actual incident detail report. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It certainly seemed to lend a certain amount of credibility to that first sighting. Not that it necessarily needed any more than it had. Like I said, speaking to the people involved, they were very, very credible witnesses. I guess just the guy was the witness, but both of them seemed, very, very credible people to my estimation anyway.
Did any of these witnesses report other anomalous activity happening to them around the same time that they saw these Mothman creatures?
Yeah, that is interesting. And there definitely was, there definitely was some of that. Trying to think of a specific instance actually where that happened. Now I know I've had reports I've taken before. Like I spoke to a lady who saw something very similar to this, but it was out in Maryland, and she afterwards had experienced phenomena normally associated with a haunting, actually, afterwards, strangely enough. Now, I would say probably the number one sort of associated paranormal or potentially paranormal phenomena to me is the seemingly unnatural fear that people end up feeling. Like a good example of that was I had a woman get a hold of me because she wanted to report her father's sighting, actually. So this was from back in 1976, and so this guy was out pretty late one night, and he's helping his friend who needs him to jumpstart his car, and sort of in an isolated spot up in Waukegan, which is sort of far north Chicagoland. And so they're out in this lot, and as her dad is hooking up the jumper cables, he just out of nowhere suddenly feels really, really frightened, right? And he can't explain it, but he starts looking around, and when he does that, then he sees on top of this silo nearby this black figure, and he describes it as having these glowing red eyes, and estimated it to be about 6 feet tall, and they didn't really stick around very, very much longer after that. And they just got out of there without even jumping the friend's car. They had to go back and get it later. And so that's probably the number one thing. And I definitely know sort of where you're going with that, because like I said, I have seen it in a lot of other cases. And there's certainly what I would describe as peripheral phenomena associated with this. Like there are people who have seen UFO sightings in the same area as, people are seeing these flying humanoids.
Right.
we've had, certainly a good number of what people are describing as pterosaurs, in these same areas. There was a particularly active area out in Indiana where I had a guy contact me about a series of glowing orbs that he had seen out there from 1981 all the way through 2016, and that was out by Prairie Creek Reservoir, and we actually received a good number of credible sightings from that area. So, I haven't heard a lot of people talk about sort of the maybe continuing like poltergeist or similar, sort of paranormal phenomena following them after their sighting. But there has been a good number of people like Paula, for instance, who will have, what I guess could be described as a UFO sighting. I don't know how to categorize her beam of light, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some kind of mystery light thing. Right.
And then, 2 years later in the exact same spot, she encounters her monster, and so I think that sort of peripheral phenomena is seen a lot more in this investigation than the sort of following phenomena,
right,
like the essentially being almost haunted literally by your sighting, where people will go home and suddenly, the TV is turning itself on and doors are opening and closing on their own. So I really haven't heard a whole lot of that with this. And I can't think of any specific instance, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about you and Emily as you're out investigating this stuff? Do you find that you run into, say, more synchronicities in your life or just oddness surrounding you as you're doing these investigations?
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely even more than usual. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, one of the words most often used to describe the features of whatever people are seeing is a gargoyle. Like, people like to use that word specifically. Mm-hmm. After a certain point in this investigation, and maybe some of it was confirmation bias, but yeah, I mean, I'm seeing gargoyles everywhere. And we were actually at our favorite rock shop, and I forget why we were there in the first place. I think Emily was interested in buying something. She collects crystals and things, and so we were there, and I was thinking about the investigation and sort of different things that I could do to try to sort of maybe expand the scope or even, well, I mean, frankly, even, precautions we should take or anything similar. And I get up to the counter and there's this little, it's like a carved vial, I guess, as you would describe it. And it's got this gargoyle carved into it. And I was like, are you serious? There's gargoyles everywhere. So I naturally had to buy this thing. I still have it. And I was just like, I need to put some sort of like, I don't potion or something in here, some sort of something meaningful. Mm-hmm. But I mean, there was a lot of that kind of stuff. And then sort of beyond that, I had some sightings of shadow people, and that's something that has followed me for a lot of my life. But I would say over the course of this investigation, that picked up quite a bit. There's two notable incidents that, well, most notable, I would say, that occurred during the course of this investigation. The first one, they were both on our street, and they were both at night. And so the first, in both cases, actually, I was out walking our dog, and in the first case, I was across the street and I was about to cross the street to go to our house. And so I look over in the direction of our house, and I see my neighbor sitting on the steps of his porch. And I was like, well, maybe he's waiting for somebody or something. I don't know. I don't feel like talking to anybody right now, so I'm just gonna beeline right home. And of course, our dog he's a lot more social than I am, honestly. And so if there's people out, like, he wants to meet them, maybe they'll pet him, who knows. And so, like, we're crossing the street, and he moves like he's going to go over to the neighbors. And I was like, oh, of course you are. And so, he's kind of tugging on the leash, and like, we get up to the curb, and I look over, and he's not sitting there anymore. And he couldn't have gone inside, like, we're talking about a span of a few seconds. And so it occurs to me that I assumed it was my neighbor, but all I really saw was somebody in shadow, because there wasn't a ton of lights out there. Mm-hmm. There's really just like a small porch light. So what I really saw was somebody in shadow sitting there, and I didn't make out any more details. Like, it's not like I could see their face or anything, because I originally thought that he was sitting there wearing a hoodie with like the hood pulled up. Right. So that was weird. Mm-hmm. And there was another time where we live sort of halfway up a hill, and so I was at the bottom of it, and I was out walking the dog again. That's usually my job at night. And so I look up at the top of our hill, and I see these three shadowy figures standing up there, and they look like they're wearing these hoods and robes, and they're standing up there. And I couldn't see the details of their face, but I did have the distinct impression that they were looking, right at us. And I looked at them for, maybe 4 or 5 seconds, and they just disappeared. And this was right in front of my eyes. Oh, wow. And, there's been stuff like that, that's definitely picked up. This was kind of weird, actually. So this would have been maybe a couple of months ago. I was in bed, and I was having a dream about aliens. I don't remember specifically what, the dream was about. It wasn't important. It involved aliens. And so I woke up, and I was lying on my side, and I'm facing the wall, and somebody's shining this bright light, like, directly into my eyes, right? It's it's like if you go to the eye doctor, and like they just shine this super bright light in your eyes. Mm-hmm. Well, it was just like that, frankly. And I was just like, who is shining this light in my eye? Obviously, I was a little curious about that. And as I became consciously aware, and I kind of looked around just with my eyes, and as I became consciously aware that, I was lying on my side, like my eyes are open, and somebody is shining this super bright light in them, as I'm consciously aware of that, I feel myself, like, almost immediately, forcefully, really, like, going back to sleep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm intimately familiar with that feeling.
Yeah, and so I was just like, well, this is happening. Like, it wasn't my first rodeo, I guess. And so I just woke up the next day, and I think I did a social media post about it, because that's what I usually do now. Mm-hmm. Just like, hey guys, this happened. I don't know. Right. But right. I mean, there's been, I would say, more of that than usual. Mm-hmm. Since this started.
As we're talking about Mothman, of course, we have to bring up Point Pleasant, and mm-hmm. What may or may not have been the original Mothman. People have been seeing winged humanoids since before then, but of course that's certainly the most popular flap of sightings of these type things. Do you think there's any connection between, what's happening now around Lake Michigan and what was happening in Point Pleasant?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think that the parallels are too distinct to ignore, frankly. People generally are describing. I mentioned the Wakanda and Woodstock sightings. Those weren't necessarily representative of what most people described. Most people described a 6 to 8 foot tall bat, or sometimes bird-like humanoid, often with glowing red or orange eyes, and they would describe this distinct feeling of fear, like this almost supernatural fear. And that's a direct correlation with what people were describing in Point Pleasant. In the 60, I think it was 66 to 67 Mothman sightings there. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I never was completely on board with the idea of Mothman as a harbinger. Even John Keel. Now I didn't know him personally, but I know him through his work, and I remember reading about his experience and sort of what led him to that. And I even after reading his experience, I still didn't understand why people necessarily connected, Mothman with the collapse of the Silver Bridge, other than the fact that, what people really love, just love more than anything, a nice, tidy narrative. Mm-hmm. You've got these 3 wonderful acts, and it finishes up in this really, really neat, convenient ending that gives the whole thing meaning. And, can't we all just now go on with our lives pondering occasionally this beautiful mystery? But the fact is, he had said that, he had received, these nebulous warnings. But, he was anticipating a blackout on the East Coast. That was the big disaster that was supposed to happen. And obviously that never happened. And then the Silver Bridge collapsed, and, suddenly it was like, oh no, it was supposed to be that thing. That was the thing all along, guys. Come on, right? But yeah, no, I don't think it was. I think, like I said, I think that it provided a nice, tidy ending to the narrative. But unfortunately, life doesn't work that way. We don't often get neat endings. Right. And our earliest case that we've received, the earliest historical case, is from 1969. And so really there isn't a gap of more than, a few years, less than a decade between these historical sighting reports. And I think if we could go back in time and invent the internet several decades earlier, we could probably fill in a lot of these gaps. Mm-hmm. And so it certainly seems like, rather than suddenly ending, really more of just sort of shifted into another area less than 500 miles away, because this earliest report is actually from Indiana, so it's really not even that far away from Point Pleasant. It really is just a few hundred miles away, and less than 2 years later, the phenomenon seems to have begun around Lake Michigan. I don't know the reason for that.
Right. Tobias, tell me about Singular Fortean Society.
Sure. So the Singular Fortean Society was founded by my wife Emily and me back in 2016, and we investigate the paranormal and try to deliver the news to people, specifically to a paranormal audience. So you'll see the news, maybe covering UFOs, and they'll play the X-Files theme, and it's a huge joke. And the same with ghosts and cryptids and everything else. And so what we wanted to do was to cover these subjects journalistically, for people who take them seriously. And, to that end, like, we do a fair bit of investigation. We write a lot of news articles. We also do feature articles, monster profiles, stuff that can be a little more, well, I'll say it can be less dry maybe than just, like the straight news. But anyway, we do all of that stuff. And anybody who's interested in it, and, hopefully you are, can find our website at singularfortean.com. You can also find the Singular Fortean Society on every social media platform. So Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram. If there are other ones that we should know about that aren't for like tweens, you should tell us, and we'll join those too. And if you like what we're doing enough that you want to be a part of it, you can join the Singular Fortean Society. There's links for that on our website, or you can go to patreon.com/singularfortean. If you enjoy the Lake Michigan Mothman and you want to learn more about it, then the Lake Michigan Mothman, High Strangeness in the Midwest, is available right now on Amazon. Now, I don't want to embarrass her, but Emily did an amazing job on the cover art for this, in the design and the layout and everything else. It is a beautiful book. Yes, so writing aside, this is one I think people would be proud to have on their bookshelf. So you can get that through Amazon. It's easy enough to just go to the search bar and look for the Lake Michigan Mothman. Otherwise, we do have a link to it on our site.
Awesome. Again, the book's The Lake Michigan Mothman, High Strangeness in the Midwest. It's by Tobias Wayland. Tobias, thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for spending tonight with me talking about Mothman and other weirdness.
Thanks for having me. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks.
Thanks for listening, everybody. I do want to thank Eric C. for his generous PayPal donation. Thank you so much, Eric. Eric makes regular PayPal donations, which helps a great deal with continuing to make Strange Familiars. So thank you again, Eric. Just a reminder, you can always find us at strangefamiliars.com. We will be back soon with another episode of Strange Familiars. Strange Familiars is a production of Dark Holler Arts, music, books, art, podcasts, and more. darkhollerarts.com. Intro and background music is by Stone Breath. Go to stonebreath.bandcamp.com for more, where you can also find Wildernessgeist. We are on Facebook, facebook.com/strangefamiliars, where you can join the Strange Familiars gathering group, and we are on Instagram at Strange Familiars.
Hey, Tim. This is Dex from New York. I'm a patron and love listening to Strange Familiars. But some interesting things I wanted to share with you. I have a lot of weird stories, but so does my mom. She's going to be 98 years old in December. And she shared more things with me than any of my other siblings, I guess, because I'm just more open to the crazy subjects that we all like to hear about. But years ago, well, I should also say she has also crazy experiences. She and my father met on a secret base during World War II. They were part of the Manhattan Project, so it's not a secret base anymore, but they were part of the Manhattan Project out in Los Alamos, New Mexico. That just leads to other sort of interesting historical stories, but also some weird ones. But anyway, this happened to my mom when she was about 12 or 13. and we were just talking about things recently. And I remembered the story that she told me that one day, one morning when she was about 12 or 13, just outside of Philadelphia, she woke up, she said, and there were these three little guys, three little men, she called them, in her bedroom. They weren't paying attention to her. She said they were just sort of standing over, away from the bed, looking like they were having a conversation. And she couldn't hear them, but they were clearly communicating with each other. And she said she saw them. She sat up in bed, looked at them, and blinked her eyes because she thought maybe she was still dreaming, and if she blinked that they would go away. But she blinked a bunch of times, and they were still there. Again, maybe noticing her, but really more interested in their own conversation. And she screamed, and then shortly after that, both my grandparents ran into the room. She told them what had happened, and they took her out of the bedroom and put her in their room for the rest of the morning. And then, strangely, without talking about it at all, by the end of the day, they had moved her out of that bedroom and put her in the room where her other brothers slept, and then put the brothers in her room. Strange that my grandparents, without talking to her at all about anything, just immediately after this incident, they switched her to a different room. I remember when she told me that story, and they never talked about it again, but she told me in confidence the story, and it's okay for me to tell it now, but I was probably 8 or 9 years old when she told me this story, because we were talking about, like, UFOs and ghosts and all kinds of things, and she said she was telling me about this experience. And it came up again recently. I wanted to know maybe a little bit more about it. And I said, do you remember what they looked like? And, and she said, well, they were just little men. She said, they didn't look, that strange, but just looked like little men with, she said they had funny hats that were scrunched on their head. And I asked her, what do their faces look like? She said, well, they just kind of looked old. But then she said, I asked her, do you remember like anything about what they were wearing? And she said, yeah, they were wearing plaid shirts. And I was like, no, they weren't. No way. And she said, yeah, it was funny. They were just wearing plaid, and they weren't menacing. They weren't giving me any problems, but they were just there, and that's what freaked her out. And then she began to realize how weird it was that my grandparents, without talking about it, without questioning her, just moved her to a different room, which leads me to believe that they must have either had some kind of other experiences in that house, or knew something. And I remember, going to visit my grandparents when I was a little kid, not liking being at the top of the stairs. There was you come to the top of the stairs, there's a bathroom straight ahead. The room that she experienced that in was directly on the left, and then the room that they moved her to was sort of back down the other hallway, one room. And that's where they moved her, and they moved the boys, my uncles, into the room where the little guys were. Anyway, the important thing here is that she never brought this up before because I never thought to ask, but she, without me prompting her, I didn't tell her anything about strange familiars. She said they were wearing plaid shirts, these little guys. And so I thought you needed to know that for obvious reasons. I have other stories, which hopefully I'll get to share with you sometime, but that blew me away when she brought up unprompted that these guys were wearing plaid. So I hope you and your family, and your lovely wife and your children are having a happy Thanksgiving, and thank you so much for all you do on Strange Familiars. Take care.
twilight dim. Maria, thou hast heard my hymn. In joy and woe, in good and ill, Mother of God, be with me still. Brightly by, and not a cloud obscured the sky. My soul, lest it should truant be, thy grace did guide to thine and thee. Storms of fate o'ercast, darkly my present and my past. Let my future radiant shine with sweet hopes of thee and thine.